Hey guys, HJG White from eToro here. Small break from value investing here. I recently took a certificate in Cisi International Wealth Management, and I wanted to explain how I was able to pass in just 1 month in 3 simple steps. Now, the first things first, before you test, you need to register. So I've created a document, and all you need to do is follow the 4 steps on that document, and then you'll be able to book your exam. The link to this document and all the other documents that I'm going to mention in this video are all in the description. Now, you can do this exam at home, but if you can get to a test centre, I do recommend it. Someone told me that they did this exam at home and they had to show their entire room first. They had to get everything out of it, and they had to show under the chairs and under the table. And if they looked away from the screen too much, they told them they have to keep looking at the screen, otherwise they might be disqualified. So you really are very restricted when you're doing the exam from home. Now, as some of you know, the reason that I took this exam is because eToro offered to pay for it. But what you might not know is that eToro will offer to pay for two types of tracks, or 2 options of level 3 certification. I put them in a spreadsheet, everything that you need to pay in order to get the level 3 certification, and the international certification in wealth investment management was cheaper, as well as it was just 1 exam rather than 2. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I'd also prefer to have international understanding of finance rather than just a UK understanding of finance. Now, on the test itself, I did not get an insane score. I got 78 out of 100. But to be clear, I absolutely suck at exams. And when I was in school, I remember being in the classroom and trying to copy things down from the board, and I was constantly having to look up and down because I really struggle with very basic memorization. So when it came to this exam, which is basically a memorization exam, I knew that I was going to find it really tough. To be clear, this is the textbook that you are going to need to read cover to cover. What I aim to give you here is I want you to take the long route, but I want you to do it with direction so that you aren't constantly getting off track and you're doing something that is very, very likely to get you that passing grade you need in the most efficient, shortest amount of time possible. So let's get into step 1, the simplest and longest step, which is to read this book. Now, with this step, I recommend not trying to memorize anything, but you do need to read this thing and take it in. I actually took the time to get the digital version of this PDF, and I stripped every chapter into a Google Words doc, and I even went and downloaded several different AI voice reading plugins for Google Chrome, and I tested them out to see which is the best free one in order to be able to listen to this book rather than read it. If you want to do this yourself, I found Speechify to be the best free one, or you could pay £127 annually. There seem to be only annual options for these AI voice reading apps, and then you could have Snoop Dogg or Gwyneth Paltrow read it to you. And normally I did a lot of looking around on this, and had I found one that was just £20 for 1 month, I probably would have paid for it and given it a try. However, Speechify, I found that their free one was good enough, and so I decided not to pay for any premium AI voice reading tools. To be honest, this step of trying to find a plugin that was free or just a one-off payment has actually made me really frustrated with the fact that everything is a subscription now. This really feels like something that should have just been downloaded once and done. But actually, that's not the reason I didn't pay for it. The reason that I never actually ended up paying for any of these AI voices, the real reason is because I listened to 3 chapters using them, and even after slowing it down, I found that none of the information was actually going in. And I think that's because when you are actually reading something, when you're reading words off a page, you really notice when you haven't taken something in, and then you go over that same paragraph until you understand it. So I do think it is important to read it. That's frustrating for people like me that is dyslexic, but unfortunately that really does feel like the best way to get the information from the page into your head. Now, good practice while you're reading it is to get a pack of highlighters or just some yellow highlighters, and you highlight at the top of each page, at the top of each chapter, you have these simple, like the learning objectives. And what I just did was I highlighted the actual learning objectives in the text, so that when it came back to learning these learning objectives, the important information was highlighted. This also just helps make sure that you are understanding the learning objectives, and it's the first stage towards memorization later on. Again, I want to keep reiterating, while you're trying to read this textbook, you're not trying to memorize it. You're just trying to make sure that you understand all the text. And when you get to the end of the chapter questions, read them, make sure that you can answer them, go back to the point where the information is, make sure you learn those learning objectives at the end of chapter questions, and then just move on to the next chapter so that you've read all the information. I also want to suggest there is a folder, link in the description, with mock exams. Do not use these mock exams while you're reading the textbook. Just use the end of chapter questions. The other thing that you're going to want to use while you're reading the textbook is Revision Express. It costs £41, I believe, and it is well worth buying. All I did was, when I finished each chapter, I went to Revision Express, and then I I answered the Revision Express questions for each chapter. And what I found was, the first time I took this, I did awfully, and then I would go back to the chapter, the highlighted bits, the learning objectives, make sure I'd highlighted any questions that I got wrong or didn't understand, and then I moved on to the next chapter. Now, for example, after finishing chapter 2, I would go onto Revision Express. I'd do the chapter questions for chapter 2 on Revision Express, but then I'd also do chapter 1. But the thing is, you want to move forward quite quickly, because chapter 1 and chapter 2 don't have the most questions in the exam. Only a few things in those chapters are actually going to come up in the exam. The later chapters, chapter 7 in particular, is going to have most of the questions in the exam. Not most of the overall, but 21% of the questions in the exam are going to be from chapter 7. So you do want to get through the textbook quite quickly and then go back over things. Now, step 2 is learning. So hopefully you have read through all of this book now, and you have at least 2 weeks before your exam. If you have read through this book and you took the time to understand each learning objective, where I would expect you to be now, and where I actually was, I did a mock exam 2 weeks before my exam. I actually have the exam here. This is the one I took, and yeah, you can see at the bottom there, 58%. So yeah, sorry, a bit better than 50%, but yeah, I was still worried. I needed a lot more marks to reliably pass. I had done these flashcards while reading this textbook, but I honestly, after I finished reading it, I never went back to those flashcards, because I just felt the amount of information I'd written down on them was too broad and there was too much for me to learn. What I actually found more useful was doing the Revision Express quizzes on each chapter, finding out the bits, like noting which questions I still found confusing, then going back to this textbook, learning the information again, and then doing the quiz again, and just sort of randomly picking different chapters to try and test myself. Now, once you're smashing the chapter questions on Revision Express, it's time to move on to the final stage, which is memorization. The good thing about doing stage 1 and 2 is, by this point you should have much less to memorize, and all you need to do is find the gaps in your knowledge. This is why the mocks are a really powerful tool here. So hopefully you haven't used them yet, and you should have 2 mocks on the link in the description, 1 mock in this textbook and another mock which randomly generates questions on Revision Express. And from what I can tell, I think there are probably around 200 to 300 questions that it makes quizzes out of, 50 question quizzes out of. What I did was I took these mocks, I got them printed out, which was really helpful as well, and as I answered them, I put little question marks next to all the ones that I didn't know the answers to. And I think this is really important, because when you do the mock online, there's nothing there to write little question marks next to, so you'll have to write down the questions you didn't know the answers to. But if you just do the mocks, and when you come to the end of it, all you'll get is the questions that you got wrong. But that won't tell you what questions you didn't actually know the answers to and got, because there was a 25% chance that you would get it right, even randomly. Once you've done the test, what you want to do is take all the questions that you did not know the answers to, and then you want to write that down. This is what I did, and it worked really, really well. I wrote out that information, then underneath the information, I wrote a silly sentence that would help me memorize the information. For example, the 3 roles of global investments performance standards are standardization, transparency, and fairness. So I created 3 images in my mind for standardization, transparency, and fairness, and they were standardized Lego bricks, transparent was Wonder Woman's invisible car, and then fairness was Judge Judy. So the sentence ended up being: a Lego builder is building a global investment building, and Wonder Woman crashes into it with her transparent car. Judge Judy then makes sure that she puts on a fair trial. What I also found well, which is quite cool, is just the process of inventing silly things to build a sentence that will help you remember the information was enough most of the time to help me remember the information itself. Even large bits of information. I was really struggling to remember the differences between trustees, trusts, settlers, and beneficiaries. It wasn't until I built this paragraph about leaving my car at my friend's house, which I trusted, and that they were the trustee, but I was the person that benefited from owning the car, that I finally managed to get all these things committed to memory. I really think if I'd given myself just one more week to do these mock exams and to do a bit more of this memorization technique, I could have easily gotten the upper 80s and even potentially over 90. This strategy of just taking the time to write these stupid little sentences was just a game changer in memorization. So that's my 3-stage plan. Read the textbook, learn the information using Revision Express, then do the mock exams and use my basic memorization technique. Guys, something I forgot to mention, a study has shown that using sexual images helps you memorize things better. So that is why some of my memorization sentences are sexual. It actually helps it go into your brain better. Another thing is I would really recommend having at least a weekend where you're doing nothing, and maybe even a week where you take time off work, you go abroad and you just take this textbook and your revision material with you, whatever. Just take sort of at least 5 days. Try and have 5 days in a row where you're not working and you can just focus on revising. And just having this condensed week will probably be better than doing months of revision. Only you can really answer how long it's going to take you to read this textbook, but I would say that a month is more than enough time. And what you don't want to get, I believe, is revision fatigue. If you give yourself too much time to read this book, I think you're actually going to find that you get bored or you start procrastinating a lot more. One of the reasons that I was able to commit to reading so much of this each day was because I had such a strict deadline ahead of me. But the thing that you really need to do if you want to pass is this.